Okay, well, I guess we can get started. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming by. I did not expect to see such a short audience here today. You are some of the smallest college kids I've ever seen. My name is Sean Kenny, and I have been invited here to speak to you guys because I've put together an exhibit over at Ryman Gardens that I encourage you all to come over and take a look at. Today, I'm just going to talk. This is kind of informal, so I'm going to go through things in a sort of casual way. I'm sure the things I'm going to be saying, you're going to have questions that pop up in your head as you go, and we'll see how it goes. You can ask me questions if you like, although I may end up getting them later in the presentation, so we'll feel it out and see how it goes. But anyway, I want to talk to you a little bit about who I am and what I do. Why on earth am I standing up here talking in front of you guys? As well as this exhibit that we have over at Ryman Gardens right now. And since this is the design college, I wanted to talk a little bit more in depth about specifically how I do what I do, how I create these sculptures using Lego pieces, and also go into some of the challenges that I face both doing that, not only the challenges of actually physically constructing these things, but also really what it is to try to pursue your career as a fine artist or as a designer or whatever else you may be into. Anyway, so some folks would say I have an interesting job. I get to play with Lego toys all day long. Don't be fooled by that picture. That's only 200,000 pieces. I actually have closer to about 10 million, so that's only, a tenth of really what I have in my place. A lot of people see this, they see my work, or they hear me speak, and they think I must work for the Lego company. But I don't. I work for me. I work just like an independent artist does. Instead of using paint or clay to create art, I decided to use Lego toys. And so I don't design the Harry Potter castle or the fire truck that you saw at Target or Toys R Us. I let the Lego company do all the hard work. I let them design all the toys and design all the parts and do all the mechanical engineering and product research and all that stuff. I do exactly what you did as a kid and what you kids still do, big kids included. I go to the toy store and I buy all these things and I mix up the pieces and I make whatever I want because that's really the fun of it all. And I've been doing it pretty much my whole life. That was me when I was embarrassingly 11, I suppose. Anyway, needless to say, I didn't always do this. I went to college, I got good grades, I did what I was supposed to do, I got a job, and I worked in an office, and I sat in front of a computer for about 10 years. I had a professional life. I worked for some .coms back during that whole crazy up and down thing you may have heard about, some big companies, some little companies, places that aren't even around anymore. I worked at Lehman Brothers, actually, of all places. If you've heard of them, they're not around either, actually. I had a nice corner office on Park Avenue in Manhattan. I was an associate vice president, which saying that right now sounds so bizarre because it really meant nothing to me at the time, because it was not fulfilling for me. I was doing what I thought society was telling me I should be doing, right? I got an executive job. I've got a lot of money. I was making a lot of money. I was wearing a $700 suit to the office every day, but I would come home at the end of the day and I would sit on the floor in my apartment in Lower Manhattan and I would play with my Lego. And a lot of people think, well, that's weird. Why is there a grown-up playing with Lego? But if you think about a model railroader, right, it's not a weird idea for a 60-year-old guy with a beard to go downstairs and play with trains in his basement after work or on the weekends. That's kind of cute. And in fact, my dad was a model railroader, and I think I got whatever he had in him, or maybe just playing with him as a kid made me realize it was okay to play with toys. And so I would go into the office and feel like this all day long, and I would sit and stare out my window at these beautiful Park Avenue townhomes, these old mansions that were built in the 1920s with unbelievably beautiful architecture. They were so ornate, and I would draw them on blank computer paper that was sitting in my office, and I would take those drawings home, and I would build that stuff out of Lego. And so at some point during this life, I decided this is not what I should be doing for a living. And I literally, in the middle of the day, stood up and I walked out. I just walked away from a big six-figure career. And I didn't really know what I was going to be doing. All I knew is I wanted to go home and I just wanted to build. I was making all these buildings. I hadn't finished them yet. I had to get home and finish, And that was what I was doing. And I just kept doing it ever since. I never went back and got a quote-unquote real job. People started finding me online. I was posting my pictures back in the day. I have a bald spot, so I'm older than I pretend. Before blogging and YouTubing and Flickering, I was sharing my creations online with people, and that was kind of special, and people were able to discover me and my work that way, and they liked it, and came to me. and more people started coming to me and asking me to do work. So now I actually create sculptures and scale models and portraits and all kinds of things exclusively out of Lego toys for everyone, from major corporations to grandmothers, for celebrities and TV shows, museums and art galleries and universities like Iowa State. It's a pretty cool job. So let me tell you a little bit about what we have here at Iowa State over at Ryman Gardens. We have 27 sculptures that I created entirely out of Lego bricks. I'm going to turn this feedback-y thing. Is that a little better? Do I have more feedback? Okay. We have 27 sculptures over at Ryman Gardens. I encourage you to go over and take a look. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of some of them. This is a hummingbird feeding out of a trumpet flower. This is a bumblebee suspended up in an atrium far over your head. This is a life-size gardener. He's gardening. That's what they do. There's a lawnmower. The university photographer had gone by and he was given a map and told to wander the gardens and here are the locations on the map where all of the sculptures are. And he came back and they said, did you find them all? Did you take some pictures? And he said, yeah, I found them all, except I couldn't find the one up on the hillside garden. Someone left a lawnmower up there, though? So I don't know if that means I did my job well or poorly, because it's obviously done well if it means you can't tell, but it's done poorly if you don't go look at it because you can't tell. We have a fox hunting down that poor cute little bunny. This is a 5-foot wide butterfly. There's a little baby bison calf. To give you an idea as to the scale of some of these, all of the sculptures at the garden are quite large. This one is 8.5 feet tall, and his wingspan is actually nearly 4 or 5 feet tall. That's me in my studio putting some finishing touches on it. The bee that you just saw is actually 4 feet long, and he has nearly a 4-foot wingspan, and he's suspended in the air. Think about that for a minute, folks. There's a rose down in the rose garden, and it's 7 feet tall, and the rose head itself is 2 feet wide. And the fox that's crawling down on that little rabbit is 250% scaled up from life size. She's not really that small. And that butterfly, as I mentioned, is 5 feet wide. It has a wingspan, if its wings were folded down and out, of probably almost about 8 feet. And it is a blast to ride. You guys got to try this thing out. I feel like the never-ending story or something. And there's a whole bunch more, so I invite you guys to go down there and take a look at the installations. They're going to be set up at the gardens. Pardon me, they're going to be set up at the gardens all the way through till October. So after Visha, you guys can go, and after you've recovered, and go take a look and wander around. And you got to try this thing. Look, I'm planting a tree. This is like the oldest form of entertainment in the world. I think they had one of these at the 1879 World's Fair. So it's a great photo op. You got to go over and take a picture. So anyway, that's what we have here. I do this kind of stuff for people all over the world. I'll show you a couple things that I've done for other clients of mine, starting with this one. This is a video, actually. I don't know if we'll get the sound of one of them coming together. Of course. And it's really big. So that's a Nintendo DSi. Nintendo actually called me up and commissioned that. Let me turn this away. I guess it was about 2.5 or 3 years ago when the DSi first came out. They wanted to set it up at the Nintendo World Store in Rockefeller Center, which is their flagship store, in time for the launch of the DSi, so that there would be something really cool to look at in the window display at Rockefeller Center and draw people in. And so we did, but it was so cool that they ended up leaving it there for over 6 months, and now they've moved it to the Nintendo Museum out in, I think, Seattle somewhere. So if you're in Seattle and you're in a Nintendo museum and you wonder why there's a big Lego thing there, now you know. And that was actually an interesting challenge. All the sculptures that I create have interesting design challenges to them, whether they're physical or budgetary or structural or even just scheduling wise. This one, they called me and they said, we want it out there in time for the launch of the product. And I said, okay, well, when is the product launch? And they said, whatever the day was, April 2nd. And I said, April 2nd next year, right? Not April 2nd in 3 weeks, right? And they said, why? Will that be a problem? The DSi only came in this funny light blue color and in black. And this is a really rare color for Lego. This is not something you just go pick up. And maybe if you get one, you got a car and it has 7 pieces in it that are that color. And I said, how on earth am I going to do this? This would normally take me 6 weeks just to build it. And so I picked up my bat phone and I called the good people at the Lego offices in Europe, and sure enough, they were kind enough to palletize and freight drop, I think, well, several hundred pounds of this light blue stuff, and it came out to me. And I was so crunched for time that I had to do all the design work beforehand, so I used different colors and I tried to draw out on large graph paper the different shapes and build little buttons and things like that. And so then when the Lego pieces arrived, I'm in New York City, they arrived at JFK. I was tracking the flight that the pieces were on, because they're actually underneath where you sit in the cargo hold is where the freight shipments go. And so I saw that it landed that morning at 12:01 a.m. and I called up the freight people, because freight is very slow. And I said, guys, I saw this flight just landed. I need to get this stuff in today. I'm only a few miles from the airport. Please make sure you put it on the front of the truck so that you can get it to me. I said, well, you know, it usually takes about 24 hours to clear customs, and then it'll be 24 hours until you get it. So I was like, well, okay, it's been there for about 18 hours, so I'll have this stuff tomorrow, right? And they're like, yeah. Oh, well, no, tomorrow's Saturday, so Monday. And I'm thinking, I only have 10 days left to build this thing. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, that's like 30% of my build time, and I'm going to need every second I can possibly get to build this thing. So I said, who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to pay? I don't care. I need this stuff right now. And they actually got one of the executives from this freight holding company to drive his SUV out to the airport, onto the tarmac, into the hangar, pull it in, depalletize my shipment, and shove as many giant cardboard boxes filled with blue Lego pieces into it as they could. And he drove it over to my studio where we unloaded, and I had enough to go on for 3 days until the truck showed up with everything else. So that is probably the craziest, most aggressive schedule I've ever had in my entire life. And I can only say this now because Teresa, who was kind enough to do this entire project here at Ryman Gardens, if I told her that, she would have wanted me to do all 27 sculptures in like 3 weeks or something. So anyway, needless to say, I do all kinds of things for all kinds of people. This is an exhibit I had done for the Philadelphia Zoo. We had 30 life-size animals that were set up all around the zoo. These are golden lion tamarins, which are small, kind of squirrel-sized monkeys. And they asked me to make 13 of them and set them up in a real habitat. So if you were walking around the zoo, you would pass a real sea turtle and a real macaw. And actually, the macaws were set up right next to this thing. You'd pop, there they are, Lego monkeys, 13 of them, picking the bugs out of each other's hair and all kinds of things. And it was fun to design them, and you have interesting design challenges when you have to try to do these things, because we didn't have enough time to design 13 different monkeys. We had time to design about 3. And so we made 3, but we made 13 of the 3. And we would flip them around and make mirror images of each other, or position them in different ways so that when they were set up, you couldn't really tell that there was a lot of duplication going on. If you see that monkey in the back who's examining very carefully that stick he's holding, he's got this expression like, what is this? He's the same monkey as the monkey down here picking the bugs out of the other guy's hair. We made sure that their hands were posable so that we could turn them around and move them and get them set up in different ways so that it looked like a real thing. And so sometimes you have to make those kinds of, I guess you could call them compromises in order to really make the project a reality. Sorry, I don't know if it's, should I come closer to here? Okay, I thought I had to get further. Anyway, we also made a life-size polar bear for that exhibit. This is a pretty big guy. He's roughly the size of a small car, and he almost didn't fit down our freight elevator, but I'll tell you the story about that another day. But not everything I make is always big and crazy. This model, as big as it may look, is actually only about 4 feet tall. It's a model of the Chicago Tribune building, and I was asked to make this for a display in a shopping center out in Chicago, and then I went Godzilla on it. But the architecture was absolutely amazing. If you're ever in Chicago and you're on Michigan Avenue, please walk and look up, because it is a beautiful, beautiful Gothic structure. And it's a shame it's a little washed out in the picture. But I had a blast taking all these regular off-the-shelf Lego pieces and trying to turn them in different directions and figure out how exactly I can make, something that probably used to be a coffee cup or a hinge for a wheel look like a gargoyle or whatever else might actually be on the building. Along with that, I figured it'd be really great to do something contrasting, and this is one of the tallest buildings in the world and just around the corner from the Chicago Tribune building in Chicago. This is Trump World Tower, And I was given the interesting challenge of trying to make reflective glass building out of plastic, which was very tricky. And I actually did a lot of prototyping, and I decided the best way to do it, when you look at reflective glass, your eye is actually looking at the glass, bouncing, and looking at whatever's behind you. And so your eye is actually traveling that distance to see what's behind you. And I thought, well, maybe I could fool your eye if I made this Lego model really, really deep. And so when you're looking at the surface of this model, you're looking through a clear Lego piece, and then a semi-clear Lego piece, and there's several layers, and then an opaque one all the way in the back somewhere in a core. And there's patterns of clouds and buildings and other things that reflect in the real building. I went around and did a lot of photography of the building and set it up, and so it really fools your eye into thinking, as you're looking into the model, that you're actually looking at something that's reflecting behind you. That was an absolute blast to create. There's one of my assistants helping me out, put the section on the top. It's the tallest thing I've ever made, actually. It's about 10 feet tall. And my ceilings are only 10 and a half, which is why it's not 11. I love architectural stuff, but I also love urban fabric. And I live in New York City. I used to live just a short walk from Times Square, and I really wanted to build this. It was really inspiring when they closed off Broadway in Times Square to vehicular traffic. And the news was that they were closing Broadway, but as far as I was concerned, they were finally opening it. Because the instant they put the road cones up on the street and there were no more cars, 10,000 people spilled out onto the streets with their cameras, walking their dogs, talking on their phones, and immediately started using that space. And it was absolutely wonderful to see so many people enjoying the space instantly. And they've now converted it to a pedestrianized plaza, and there's no traffic, and there's never going to be traffic in there anymore. And as a New Yorker, I love that. I don't have a car, and I love the fact that you can actually sit and enjoy the space. New Yorkers avoid Times Square like the plague because it's full of tourists who are bumping into each other. And they learned before they did this that they crammed 90% of the people that were going through Times Square were on this little sliver of sidewalk. It was 10% of the space. And so now everybody can actually enjoy the space. And when they did that, I went out and I sat down in one of those little chairs, the real ones, and I had a cup of coffee, and I just looked up, and I actually felt proud to be a New Yorker, which is a weird thing to say because most New Yorkers are cynical and crass people. But I felt proud to be a New Yorker, and I actually felt glad to be in Times Square, and it was fun to see all the tourists walking around and taking pictures and to give someone directions. And so I really wanted to build something like that, and for me, that was my inspiration. It was the urban fabric and not necessarily the architecture for something like this. People find inspiration in anything. It could be a mountain. It could be a good book. And for me, it was this. And you have to reach into yourself and find that. And sometimes it doesn't matter. This wasn't something that was commissioned. I just made it for myself. I just had to get it out of my system. And sometimes it's okay to do that. And as a result, if you really pour yourself into it, people will appreciate that. They'll actually see your passion, not physically, but it will imbue itself somehow in your work. And as a result, Samsung was so excited when they saw this. They said, we need to set this up in the Samsung Experience Store, which is just up from Times Square. And it was there for 2 years. We actually had some digital plasma screens that they donated, and we made the Times Square tower that have the video screens on them. We wanted to hook it up so that they had these Wi-Fi enabled cameras, and you could take your picture, and then it would show up in the Lego Times Square. That would be pretty cool. But unfortunately, the store actually closed before we got to do that. But this was a lot of fun to make. I have dancing LEDs that jump around inside the model and look like actual Broadway flash bulbs. And this is the most sophisticated, high-end technological piece of LED computerized equipment that I could find. I bought a string of $11 Christmas lights on Amazon. And I just poked them into the little holes and set the chaser mode, and they dance around, and they look like real Broadway marquees. But I was starting to say before, not everything I make are these big, giant, crazy, larger-than-life, 20-foot tall things or whatever. This train is only about a foot and a half long, maybe. It only has maybe 1,800, 2,000 pieces in it. I made it for, have you guys ever seen the show 30 Rock with Tina Fey and Alec Baldwin? Tina had written a Lego building experience into one of the scripts of the episodes a few years ago, and they got through script and everything, and they were ready to film it, and they were like, shoot, we need a prop. How are we going to get this? And they called around, they looked all over the country, and they finally found me, and we were talking on the phone with conference calls for a week. They didn't know if they wanted a skyscraper or a train or what, and we were bouncing around ideas. And we actually also eventually, I asked them, I said, yeah, out of curiosity, do you guys film in New York or in California? I'm here in New York. And they said, oh, we're at Silver Cup Studios. I said, I'm going to hang up the phone and walk over because you're about 350 feet away. And anyway, needless to say, we made this for the script, and it worked out really well. They liked it so much they kept it, I think, in the writer's room. So it doesn't always have to be something big. These portraits I do of famous people as well as not so famous people all the time. A lot of people call me up. It'll be a mom getting a birthday present for their son or something like that, or daughter. And these are actually only about this big. And they're a lot of fun because I can actually draw them out These I actually draw out in Photoshop. I draw it out as colored dots because Lego is just colored dots, and so is a computer screen. And if you zoom in all the way on a photo and a computer screen, it's just colored dots. And so I figured, all right, I'm just going to do it that way. And so I draw these things out on the screen as if I was using digital crayons, and I get a nice grid that looks a lot like cross-stitch instructions, and I can pass that off to one of my assistants, one of my many assistants who can help build these things. We're able to get these out to people really quickly, which is nice when Christmas rolls around because people think that they can get things in 2 weeks, and they often can't. And so it's nice when the day after Thanksgiving comes and 900 people call me and ask for one of these. We can get them done pretty quickly. You get asked to make a lot of really weird things when you're doing work on commission, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. I had a slide in there of 150 Chewbacca's, but I guess it's gone. Some days you just have to make 150 Chewbacca's. Anyway, so one of the things people always wonder is, how did you do that, right? Like, it's easy to show these pictures and say, oh yeah, Tina Fey, Alec Baldwin, we all had lunch. But how do you actually get that train put together? How do you make a hummingbird? So I'm actually going to step through some slides and show you my process. This is a car, as you all know. We're not familiar with these in New York City. It's actually a Mazda 2, and as the Mazda 2 was coming to the United States, I had previously done some work with Mazda. They called me up and they said the president would really love to have a model of the Mazda 2 in his office. I had made some Mazda 3s for them. Okay, sure. So anyway, I said, all right, how am I going to do this? So the first thing I did is I went online and I said, well, okay, what's this thing look like? And I found a bunch of pictures, both on Mazda's website and also elsewhere. You just do a search through Flickr or Google or whatever else and find as many pictures as you can, and I just download them all to my computer, and I save them all in a big folder. Mazda was, the Mazda website, I was lucky. They had this schematic here, which is basically a line drawing, a side view and a front view of the car, with all these dimensions. That grid up there with all those numbers are the dimensions of the wheelbase and how high the roof is and other things. And so I was able to use these drawings as really a schematic to get going. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take, in the back there you can sort of see a drawing on the back of the sheet of paper. I'll take a sheet of graph paper. I've made my own graph paper that's proportioned to Lego bricks because they're rectangular, not square. And I'll draw on it. I'll just draw like I'm drawing a drawing or a cartoon or something. And I'll draw the car, looking at the schematics and other things. And then when I've got my drawing on there, I'll just start tracing around the graph, around the grid, and making the zigzags. And really what I'll do is that gets you a cross-section of the largest part of that car, right down the center. If it was a human, it'd be right down my middle, right? And so I'll build that, and you can see this sort of flat shape that's standing up, being held up by a little bookend. That is a two-dimensional version of the drawing that I made based on the schematic that I downloaded from their website. You can do that from the front view as well. You can draw the zigzags and then do the front view of the car, and that little bookend that's holding it up is actually the correct silhouette of the side of the car. So once you have a front and once you have a side, you can kind of start fleshing it out a little bit by looking at the photos. So it's not all mathy, but the math is really important. You need to know that your measurements are right. You need to know that the distance from the wheelbase to the handle or whatever is roughly accurate. I say roughly because with Lego you have to take a lot of liberties. But anyway, with those measurements, I can use the photos as reference, and then I'll start fleshing out and creating curves and building down around the side with window and trying to figure out exactly where I want to have things. And once I've got something that can probably stand up, I can start building and bringing pieces around to the front so it can meet up with my cross-section. And it's easy to do it this way because you can start taking things off and on pretty easily. You can build in any direction you want. You don't have to start at the bottom and just go up, up, up and have to know what you're doing already. You can take pieces off pretty easily. And by pretty easily, you can see the mess my table is. They often go all over the place. And anyway, once you started fleshing it out, you can really build an entire half of the car. And the car is half because it's symmetrical. And so once you've got something that you really like, it looks something like this. The president of Mazda wasn't going to want that. It's also balanced up on a coffee cup or something like that because the wheels are just there like little hollow shapes. I realized actually in doing this car that cars are tricky because the only part of any vehicle, the only part of a vehicle that touches the ground are the tires, which is good if you're a real car, but not so good if you're going to be a Lego model that might be too heavy for one Lego piece of an axle to hold the whole thing up. So you have to really come up with neat ways of getting the wheel structure to support the weight of the car by having things hidden on the inside that'll hold the whole thing up. Anyway, so you go through that whole process. It looks something like this. Wow, I even went through the trouble to draw half a Mazda logo. I must have had nothing to do that day. Ignore the Homer Simpsons in the background. That's copyrighted. And there it is from the inside. And I actually put it on a little turntable. That's a little thing I got at IKEA for $3. It's meant to go on your kitchen table or with your salt and pepper and stuff. And that way I can spin the model around on my table and see it from all sides as I start to build the final version, which is one that I build with glue. And so back there, you can see the final version, that's the one that was eventually photographed in the photo you saw first. And I can look at my original one, and I use that as a template. It's a prototype, and I can duplicate it by counting and going piece by piece, brick by brick, and replicating it on both sides, of course, with glue, layer by layer by layer by layer, straight up, all the way to the top. That's why that car in the back there looks kind of funny. It's got like a bottom sliver of a headlight and that sort of thing. It's because you just go straight up. And the trick then at that point is really just figuring out how to interlock your pieces so that they stay all connected. I glue them because I ship these things all around the world, or I put them on public display like we have here at Ryman Gardens. And you want to make sure that the good people at UPS won't do a number on them. If you've ever taken your awesomest Lego creation in the universe across the house to show your mom, and oh wait, hold on, that's not it. Let me show you. Hold on, wait, I have to fix it. And so, needless to say, it does wonders bouncing down the New Jersey Turnpike. So anyway, so that way, when I'm gluing, the glue is permanent, and so if I put a piece down, it's not going to come back up without tools after a couple of minutes. And so by doing the prototype first and then the glued copy second, you can make sure that you're not making any mistakes, that you've already thought through the whole thing. And so there's sort of mostly the final piece as it is all glued together, sans wheels, it seems. And that's kind of the process. There it is. Lego car. So if you can do car, you can do anything. Creating curved shapes with rectangles is really tricky. That's really the trick to doing this Lego thing. I use the exact same techniques to create this fella. His name is Burke, actually. His mother commissioned this of him and his brother. They live down in Florida. We shipped it down there for Christmas. And can you imagine opening up a box under the Christmas tree and seeing yourself in Lego staring back at you? She said they took it well, so. But all of the exact same techniques that I showed you that I did with that car, I did for Burke. He's roughly symmetrical. No face is truly symmetrical, but you can get most of the way there by doing the same thing, by doing a half and messing around with it. Eyes are very tricky, actually. I'm sure if we have any painters or people who draw here, the human being, we all look at the eyes. When we talk to each other, we look at our eyes. Nobody's going to look, at my elbow while I'm giving this presentation. Or if I do, you're going to see I have a darn nice looking elbow. But anyway, I spend almost all the time working on the eyes. You can see down in the bust part, it's all just basic rectangles, big chunky bits. But as you get up and towards his chin, do you see how there's a finer level of detail? That's when I actually start using the smaller pieces to get more detail. There's actually a Lego piece that allows you to jump over just half a brick. And I probably use 1 million of those things in a face. Because you can get real subtlety. You're really stretching the resolution, really, of Lego by doubling it that way. And the eyes are the trickiest part of all. He actually had relatively narrow set eyes relative to what I would normally do on a Lego bust. We usually, roughly, the human adult, I would end up putting a certain amount of space between the eyes and the pupils and things like that. But he had narrow set eyes. And I had a really tricky time because if I moved the pupil over one stud, he looked like he was cross-eyed, and if I moved it out the other way, he looked a little like Marty Feldman. And so I actually came up with a neat trick. Those eyes are actually minifigure frying pans, like the little thing the little guy would hold. And it's perfect because it's a circle and it's got a little peg on it. And I could get a clip exactly where I wanted it and then put it in the clip. And I could actually slide it up and down a little bit in that clip. So that way it would be a relatively appropriate height to his eyelid. Because if your eyelid is up a little bit, we see a lot of subtlety in our eyes. If your eyelid is up a little bit, you look a little squinty. And if it's down a little bit, you look a little crazed. And so it was a neat trick. And I actually filed that away. I'm going to have to do that again sometime. Anyway, so that's kind of how I do a lot of the sculptures in general. But I thought I'd also go behind the scenes a little bit, and you haven't seen this either, at the sculptures that I put together here at the gardens and show you how some of those came together. In addition to gluing them, because these are all going to be outdoors and relatively unmanned, we had to know that we needed them to survive the occasional Visha. And so we ran steel through all of them. This is what I do for any outdoor grade sculpture that I put together. There's a steel plate on the bottom of all of them that can be bolted down into the ground, and those are welded to steel rods that come upwards and into the body. These are the legs of the baby bison, the bison calf that we have. And you can see we built the Lego right up to the steel. And there was a lot of complicated coordination that had to happen before we ever even started building anything with Lego pieces. We had to do a lot of CAD drawings. We had to get fabricators that could weld and maneuver the steel very precisely. Because if that steel was 0.5 millimeter off, you wouldn't fit a Lego piece up against it. It would just hit and it wouldn't go in. And you'd have to jump over one whole extra Lego piece and you'd have a hole. And then you wouldn't have any strength. There'd be no grabbing action going on that steel. in addition, with something like a bison is really tricky. He's got 4 legs, and the 4 legs don't connect until you get to his belly. So if you're building 4 little things down on the table, and they're rigid to a piece of steel, and one of them is turned a little bit this way, and when I mean a little bit, I mean half a degree, right, or a little this way, or if it's tipped up a bit, you're going to have a real problem when you need to connect all those legs together, because Lego is unforgiving. You can't just shim a little piece of wood or something in there like you would if you were doing carpentry. You have to get it completely perfectly right. In the case of something like this, we would end up building a big box down at his feet so that we had almost like a platform that we could start building the feet on, and then we would break that off later. We wouldn't glue it as the stomach eventually connected up there. And we had to make sure we did it in a way that we didn't inadvertently build our little scaffolding into the sculpture permanently. So we get the steel welded. This is our hummingbird over here on the right before it became a hummingbird, that thing that looks like a big number 7, and that's our bison in the back, the mother bison. And you can sort of imagine that horizontal at the top is where the hummingbird body is. The first diagonal coming down is where his nose is. The longer second diagonal by the blue square is the trumpet flower that he's feeding out of. And the straightaway with the triangle on the bottom goes into the pedestal base and holds the whole thing up. And that big piece of steel extends all the way out to prevent the whole thing from wanting to tip over. Incidentally, these behind-the-scenes photos, I don't have any particular order, but, and so we then, once we have the steel, we had to do all the design work while the steel was being fabricated, so we figured out how to get these Lego sculptures built. The steel would show up, and we would just start building row by row by row, one by one. We would wrap them in industrial-grade saran wrap in case we inadvertently dropped some glue on them, and it's just a matter of going up. When you're building something that's 8, 9 feet tall, you have a lot of physical challenges ahead of you. The hummingbird body, when you look at him, seems to hover in space. He just levitates up there. It's almost magical. And you need some real magic if you've built the belly but you haven't built the back and it's not hanging on the steel yet. And so we ended up, this white thing that looks like a spaceship docking bay is actually a little bit of scaffolding that we built with some white pieces laying around that connects into the lower part of his beak and extends outward under where his belly was eventually going to go, and it served as sort of a Lego base plate, like a building platform, that we were able to actually build upwards on until we got to that height of the steel. It's only a few inches, but that could have been, maybe a day's worth of work. And you couldn't just stand there and have somebody holding it the whole time. They're like, I have to go to the bathroom. And so there it is a little further up. As we started to capture the steel, we build right up next to it and hug it and go all the way around it. And at this point, I think it looks like we had to break away some of our scaffolding, and we've got a blue clampy thing just balancing on it and holding the whole thing up. There's some more of that. When we were building the hummingbird, as you can see, we were both standing on step ladders. This is one of my assistants, June. We're working all the way up there. We've got a cart on top of a table with all of our pieces way up there, and I'm standing on the other ladder, and June there is standing on the first ladder. And one of my other assistants was working on a different sculpture elsewhere in the room, and she left to go to the bathroom. And she came by, and it's always really great to see these come together because it's a very slow build. It's like building a house. Like, you can knock down a house really fast, but it takes a long time to put one back in. And so we have this very slow progression. Day by day by day, it slowly gets bigger. And we're standing up there, and we're putting pieces down on the wings, and this other assistant of mine started walking out of the room, and she's like, wow, look at that. That's getting so tall. Man, she's like, any bigger, that's not going to fit out the door. And I was like, uh-oh. That's got to fit out the door. So like, stop everything. So I climb down off the ladder, and I go over to our tools. I get the tape measure. I stretch it out. I measure up to that row right there. I go over to the door. I measure the door. It is 1/2 of an inch shorter than the door frame, including a small wooden pallet we had on the bottom that we wheeled it around with. So we said, okay, well, we still have like 3 feet of wings to build. And then we measured the width, and the wings were going to be far wider than the doorway as well. And so we said, ugh. For about an hour, we all sat there. And one guy was like, what if, well, and I actually recall sitting on a chair like this. For about 20 minutes, just thinking. And, okay, we could put some steel in the wings and attach them to the bottom of the, no, you'd see the bottom of the wing. What if we put something on the top? We could kind of have it hugged down on the top. No, but then it's going to want to fall over this way. We had a crazy idea to use hinges so that they could just kind of go down like gull wing doors, But then we didn't know how we would keep them locked in position and when they were upright. Because you're using Lego hinges, they're not really meant to hold the weight of a 3-foot hummingbird wing. And eventually we cooked up this crazy idea that we would build the wings completely separately. We broke down some of what we had already built, and we built a notch like this in the top of the wing. So on the body there's a notch like this, and on the wing you can see there's a reverse notch. And then we got some industrial grade, no, we used some extra Lego pieces. We found some little dowels they look like dowels, they're Lego pieces that could slide in through the body part of the wing and into the center part of the wing itself and hold them in place. So we put them up there like that, and they were just held in place by the Lego studs and those little Lego pins that were in there. And we said, well, that looks like it'll hold, I guess. And so I walked over, and the Hummingbird was otherwise completely done. He looked like this. And I walked under and I tapped him under the belly, because steel flexes, and it's meant to flex. And Lego doesn't, but we've hugged the Lego to the steel. And when you tapped him under the belly, he would kind of jiggle around a little bit, and he would eventually stop. So I went under him with the wings on there, and I tapped the underside of the belly, and he jiggled around a little bit, and the wings started doing this, right? And then he stopped, and the wings just kept doing this. And we're like, well, who's going to go under there and whack it like that? It'll be set aside up on a flower bed. And I was like, well, okay, maybe that'd be okay. One of my assistants said, what about wind? I'm like, oh. Yeah, it probably gets windy out here,
Windy today.
Yes. So we said, okay, and so we went back to the drawing board, and we actually redesigned the wing entirely. We got some flat steel, and we put the flat, because we were done. The steel goes inside the wing. And so we put the flat steel over the top of the wing, and we actually built it into the wing. So we made the wing extra thick. It was a trick we figured out when we were working on the Dragonfly, because the Dragonfly had these really long, wide wings that had to go horizontal. Lego doesn't do horizontal very well. It's good with this, but not this. And we realized we could make the wing almost shaped like a real wing, actually, where it bulges in the center but tapers off on either side. And unless you look at it straight down from like a satellite or something like that and look right down at the cross-section of the wing, you're never going to know that it has a bulge like that. Because if you're looking at it from this side, the wing is going to look like it's tipped this way. And if you're looking at it from this side, the wing is going to look like it's tipped this way. And if you're looking at it from the bottom, it's going to look like it's flat. And so we got a steel piece right through that area, very, very precisely. And we built a little channel into the back of his body, right where his muscles are. They have those crazy muscles that do this on their wings. And it inserts like a socket right there. And we still have those pins, and we threw some piano wire up between the two wings just to be safe. So if it bobbles, they bobble together. So you get all kinds of crazy situations going on. The butterfly, this stealth fighter looking thing, is the armature inside that butterfly that you saw me riding on before. That was incredibly difficult because Lego does not do diagonals. And there isn't a straight surface on this entire sculpture. This is the first sculpture I've ever made where you don't see the long side of a Lego brick. Every single one of those little bumps, every single one of those little notches in the corner is the short end of a very long piece. Because you have to do it that way, because it's going diagonally and you're zigzagging the pieces across. So not only are you have these diagonal shapes with Lego, but you've got diagonal steel going through the diagonal shapes with Lego. And to make it worse, our fabricators decided to give us a real challenge, and they accidentally welded the steel on a 45-degree angle as well. So I had diamond shapes that went inside rectangular holes. And there's a lot of this going on. That is the sacrilegious slicing of a Lego brick that you can see. And if I had a photo of the floor underneath this sculpture, it was littered. It looked like a Lego barber had come in and done a Lego haircut, because it was all over the floor, little shavings of yellow bits and pieces all over the place. And we got very close to the edge. You can see there's only a stud or two outside the steel. And generally we try to make the walls a little thicker so it has something really to grab onto. But it ended up, I thought it was going to be about 3 weeks of full-time work to build the butterfly, and it was actually 6. So it took a lot longer. But as a result, I think the thing came out really fantastic. The bee was an interesting challenge. The sculpture itself wasn't relatively complicated other than the wings, but we were starting to get the hang of how to do wings. Most of these shapes are kind of like a bathtub when you're building them. They've got a bottom and they've got a big ring around the outside, and then eventually it closes off on the top. And the bee is not unlike that. However, it had to hang in the air, which meant that it couldn't be pulled up onto a hoist and then go like this, right? It needed to be level in all 3 directions. And so we said, how the heck are we going to do that? We know we need to have steel inside so that we can attach this little loop so that we can hoist it up. But we don't know how much the steel is going to weigh, and we don't know where that weight is going to be distributed across the model. We also don't know, once we build this thing, how heavy the head is going to be relative to the butt. And we also don't know, even if we could try to calculate that, we would have no way of knowing, because whoever happened to be building it that day might use different types of pieces that end up making it denser or hollower, more hollow, and change the weight there. And so we scratched our heads and we said, okay, well, and the other problem was that he has these legs that dangle down below him. So we had to build him from the belly up and add the legs at the end. So we didn't know what that was going to do to the weight. So we said, all right, well, let's just build as much as we can. We'll go up to about here, and we'll leave some cavities and some boxed off areas. And we went out and bought fishing weights. And we said, all right, let's just put the weights in. We'll hoist it up when it's kind of maybe 85% of the way done, 90% of the way done. We'll hoist it up, and we'll put the weights in. And then we'll just get them to balance, and we'll build them in with Lego. We'll build little Lego boxes and keep them in there. And then we'll get it to balance out. And we were concerned because we still needed to then finish off the rest of the model and close it off, and that'll still change the weight. And then we needed to really hoist them all the way up and put the legs on underneath, and that was going to change the weight too. So we were worried. And we didn't really know what we would do, but we figured, well, in the worst case, we could add some stuff to the outside later, a weight and then a little piece of Lego over it or something. I don't know. We'll figure it out. So the big day came when we had to actually hoist this thing up. We brought it up, and it was absolutely 100% perfectly balanced by sheer freakish luck. So all that planning, I suppose for nothing, but if we hadn't done it, then you know it would have been a disaster. This is my assistant, Jiyun, putting the mandibles on. He's impossible to move because you can't put him down because he doesn't have a flat bottom. And you can't just keep holding him because the Lego pieces are pressing into your skin. And if you're holding him from the front, the antennas are in your face. And if you're holding him from the back legs are coming out, and you don't want to get near the stinger because, you know, I'm allergic. But anyway, we actually had to build a special jig, a temporary wooden table that we could set him down onto that was custom made to the exact heights and proportions of the bee, and he sat down on there. And we actually then had no idea how we were going to get it from my studio in New York City here, right? Because all these sculptures were created by a fine art handling facility that does this sort of stuff for a living. They're the cream of the crop. They'll get you something to Tokyo and back or just across town, and it'll be flawless. A Ming vase, whatever, a painting worth $1 million. But we said, well, how the heck are we going to get this to them, let alone into the crate? So we had this weird little wooden thing on there, and we picked it up, and we said, well, we made this. And they said, great. And they screwed it into the bottom of the crate, and it's still there. So sometimes the simplest things are all you need. Working on tall things, as I mentioned, is very difficult. These are two of my assistants, Jung-ah and Inya, standing on top of tables because the rows had gotten so tall that they couldn't stand walking up and down ladders anymore. You really lose your calf muscles after a while because you're kind of trying to balance on your toes while you're up on a ladder. And it was days and days and days and weeks building this. And so I said, all right, forget it, you're going to hurt yourself. And so we pulled over a table on one side, we pushed a table over on the other side, then we got a third table and put it up on the tables, you know, for a work table, and they climbed up on the table. Eventually that got, this is what it looks like from the top down, by the way. No cheating, I had to build this the way a real rose is built, with every petal in every position, because when you look at it from the outside, you can always see in through the angles and where the petals are. But eventually it got to the point where we had to put a stepladder on top of the table. She was worried she was going to bang her head, but we have 10.5 foot ceilings. And this is how poor Jung-ah had to finish the rest of the rows. Never a dull day. We thought the water lilies would be the easiest. They're just big flat circles. We saved them for the end, actually. And there were 5 of them, and even though they were huge, they were all exactly the same, which means we could duplicate them relatively easily. And they were also just big flat circles, so they were relatively trivial to put together. However, we did not anticipate a lot of things, as we never anticipate. So we didn't have a lot of time, so we all sat around and we just said, all right, well, they're green. Let's figure that out. And we put down 2 layers of pieces, and we put the green pieces on the top. We came up with a design for the sides, and we used that as a prototype. We made a quarter circle, actually, because you could use it all 4 ways around and then on all the other water platters. But then we were like, wait, it's sitting on top of a big flat plate of steel. We need to attach it somehow. And so we had to crank up these legs that we've made for them so they can stand in the pond, climb under there, and figure out how to wrap Lego around, down, under, and up these holes that we had pre-cut into the steel so that they could actually rest there. So the Lego is actually only attached around on the outside. In theory, I suppose if you turn this thing upside down, you could imagine the center would bulge outward because it's not actually attached to anything. I guess it's a lot like being a big kid sitting on the floor playing with Lego, but you don't imagine doing this as a profession. It's kind of a funny thing. Then we got it here, and we had to get it into the lake. I have never worn waders in my life. I have also never worn camouflage anything in my life. But there you have it, the city slicker in his camo waders. And I think Nathan back there, his expression says it all. Those are not light. Rolled steel is very, very, very heavy. And we actually had to walk out there amid the muck and the rocks, lower them down very gently, and the legs telescope out because the bottom of a lake is never really level. And we said, well, we can just reach in. We have a little Allen wrench. You can turn it. The leg will drop and tighten it. Easier said than done when you can't see into the water, and it's 3 feet down where the Allen wrench has to go, and it's wet, and the Allen wrench key is the exact same size as the Allen wrench hole, so I got it in there, but I can't, wait, hold on, oh, it came out, and then I got it! I can't turn it! It's too, oh, I dropped the Allen wrench. Anybody sure of another one? Okay, we've only got 3 left, guys. So yeah, that's a little bit about how all these crazy things came together. This is my whole team, myself over here on the side, and you saw some photos of Jiyun Jung-ah and Inya. That's David Pagano, one of the world's greatest Lego animators who took sabbatical from doing animation to help out, and my assistant Jeffrey in the back there behind the bison. These guys are all artists in their own right. They're painters, they're sculptors. David's an animator, as I mentioned. Jiyun over there is an architect by trade. She actually had just graduated and said, well, I could get a job now, or I could wait 6 months and do this first. And she had an absolute blast. Everybody here that works on my team is, as I mentioned, in the creatives, in the creative field somehow. And I think it's easier to teach someone who knows how to paint a face how to do it with Lego bricks. But I can't teach someone who knows how to make a Lego spaceship how to make a face, right? And all of these guys are top-notch. They're really great. I think it's interesting, the team that I've built, because I've been able to work with these people and still allow them to pursue their art. Jeffrey, in the back there, got a job lecturing at University of Maryland, and I'm in New York City, so it's actually not that far. He can take the train down Friday nights, stay the weekend, come back up Tuesday mornings, and now he gets to teach. And then, oh, I have a show coming up. I need a week off to do an installation. Great, have fun. Please invite me, right? And so we're able to pursue all of our own creative interests. Mine's the Lego, of course, but these guys can do their own things and still do work that helps pay the bills when they're in between gigs, but also allows them to flex their creative muscles and have a little bit of fun. This project, I gave a lot of design work to these guys. And I was talking with another person who's from here in the design college that came over to the gardens the other day. And she said to me, she's like, yeah, one of my teachers told me that you have to give the job like 5 years before you give up on it. Because you're an architect, you have this aspiration of creating skyscrapers, or you're a painter, and you want to just go to your studio and make whatever you want and sell them at openings. But that's really, really hard. And it doesn't mean it's impossible, because tons of people do it. I do it, and all of these guys do it. And we do it in an expensive city. But you have to give it a little time, because if you go and you're an architect and you get hired by a big architecture firm that's making the most awesome skyscraper in, I don't know, downtown LA or something, you're not going to get hired to create the terrace that's going to have the rooftop bar. You're going to get to make sure all the bolts have the right specification and are in the exact same millimeter, you know. Or if you're designing a convention center, somebody's got to make the bathrooms, right? If you're making a painting, right, somebody has to go pick up the paint from the paint store. And those are the kinds of things the new guy gets, because the guy who's been doing it for 10 years is like, I'm done going to the paint store. I don't have enough time to paint. I need someone to help me. And they're going to find folks like you guys to help. And truth be told, this exhibit was the time that these guys really shined. Jung-ah down here, who's sitting next to the bison, is a great example. She's been working with me for 2.5 years. And when she first got out of school, I gave her a lot of tasks that were things that needed to be done, but were difficult to get done in the amount of time I had. They were easy tasks. Like making 150 Chewbaccas. I can design one, but I need her to glue all 150 of them. Or that Mazda you saw, I had previously done a different Mazda. I had to make 27 of them. So I said, let's just set up a production line and make a lot of these things. And somebody has to sort all these pieces that are left over when I'm done. And she was doing that for nothing but 2 months. I felt bad about that, actually. I gave her the rose as her personal project, and she knocked it out of the park. It is phenomenal. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that I had very little to do with the actual bricklaying design work of that sculpture. I designed the overall appearance. We figured out what it was going to look like, the positioning. I did all the sketches, but I said, here, this is yours. Figure out how to actually do this. And she'd been doing it for 2.5 years for me, so I knew she could. But I was floored when I saw her design, really floored, to the point where when she was building it, I was jealous, and I said, can I help? And I got up on the ladder, and I helped her build it. It's really phenomenal. Please go down and look at that rose. This is a great example of how, if you plug through it for a little while, that project will come up, where even the guy who wishes he could design the rose doesn't have the time to do it, and he's just going to have to give it to you. And so you're going to get the chance to do that. And when you shine, you'll shine. And as it is right now, she's back at my studio in New York designing lamps right now for HGTV for me. It was something I was going to do, but I realized she's amazing, and I need to give her more work like this. And people will do the same to you as well. How am I doing on time, by the way? 12 minutes. All right, I'm going to try to go through the last little bit fast. One day I was preparing for a different presentation, and I was talking with my wife about what I would speak about. And I didn't really know. And she said, well, you know, what's different now about doing this Lego thing than maybe what you imagined or what it started out as? Has anything changed sort of with what you do? And it's changed very much so. I do a lot of commissioned work, as you saw, trains for TV shows and Nintendo pieces. That means I'm doing something for someone else. Right, even here, I've done all these great sculptures for Room and Gardens. And that means I'm not the artist who's standing with his beret on backwards in the art studio painting whatever I want, right? And I get to do that stuff sometimes, but you have to pay the bills. And commission work is the way I do it. And so that changes things. It means I'm making something for someone else. Sometimes I'll get lucky and someone will call me, like the New York Stock Exchange, and ask me to build something, and I'm really into it. I told you before how much I love doing architectural stuff and urban stuff, and this is the New York Stock Exchange building on Wall Street, for those of you that either know it or have thrown tomatoes at it recently. But as an architectural piece, it was amazing. I got to do all those figures up on the top and the Corinthian columns, and it was just a total blast. I'd spent twice as long on it as I should have, but I didn't care because it was just so much fun. And sure, I like that stuff. But as I said, there's my 150 Chewbacca's. Some days you just have to do stuff that someone else wants you to do for them. I do a lot of portraits, as I mentioned before. And what I realized was that doing a portrait is not like doing a painting for yourself. It's like a painting, right? Or a drawing, or a Lego mosaic. But when you're doing a portrait, you actually have to make the person not only physically look like what they look like, but it has to imbue their personality somehow. Right? It has to really reflect who they are. That's hard enough if you know the person, but if someone just emails you a JPEG and says, this is Riley and the dad, I don't know who these people are. I may not even get a good photo to work from, right? And I try really hard to get that emotion to come through. But what that really means is that I realized that makes me the vessel for someone else's vision. It wasn't my idea, actually, to make a 9-foot-tall hummingbird. It was my idea to do it that way. And it was my idea to come up with the design and how it was going to be positioned and what it was going to look like. But it was Teresa here and her team at Ryman Gardens that said, we want a 7-foot-tall rose. Actually, they wanted a 5-foot-tall rose. 7's cooler. And so, sorry, I'm just scrolling through. I realized I had a lot of portraits here. And so it means you have to be the vessel for someone else's vision. You have to try to become their paintbrush, right? And really do what they expect. But do it in a way that you are still you, and you are still putting your passion and your personality and your feeling into it, without overriding what they really want or need. I'm actually going to flip through. I had some logos, but that's boring. And I'm going to show you a better example of that, since we're running short on time. That is a Manhattan loft under construction, or reconstruction. The building was about 100 years old. There was a woman who was an artist. She was a painter, and she liked to paint spontaneously. She would go into a gallery. Her art actually would be to take a pencil into an empty gallery and just go at the walls for a week. And then when the gallery opened, that would be her show. And after the exhibit closed, they would paint over it. That was just what she did. She's very spontaneous. She just sort of feels the lines and she goes with it. And they come out very cool and a little cartoony. Anyway, she and her husband were renovating their loft in Manhattan, and they have a boy. He's about 10. And they said, well, he's going to have this sleeping loft. You can sort of see some stairs. You can imagine there's some stairs coming up this way. They turn, they go up, and up top there is where his bed was going to be. And he's a total Lego maniac. We want to do something in his room that's Lego. We want to build the sleeping loft out of Lego. So when the construction guys heard this, they were like, yeah! And then they looked at the Lego pieces like, how the heck am I going to do this? They got to drill. It was like, that's not going to work. And they're like, we got to ask the architect to design something for us. So they called the architects, and the architect's like, yeah, this is awesome. And so they did this whole schematic, and they figured out where every single piece was going to be. They drew all the little studs on the tops of the pieces. They had the guys fabricate the stairs so that they were at Lego dimensions, and they had steel balusters put in at certain distances away from each other to the 1/10 of a millimeter and perfectly straight. And then the architects were like, how the heck are we going to do this now? And they didn't know what to do, and so they found me. And so I said, okay, what exactly are we going to do here? It's got to be Lego, but this is going to be a staircase. This is going to be a surface in your home, right? If you paint a wall in your home, look, I like Edgecombe gray. Oh, this is beautiful, right? And 3 years later, you hate Edgecombe gray. You want Robin Eggs blue. Oh, yeah, Robin Eggs blue. This is Lego. This is going in. This is getting glued down with industrial solvent. This is never coming out until someone takes a sledgehammer to it. So that's a pretty serious thing. That's a pretty tall task. And so I said, well, tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out some ideas for what this loft can look like. you can imagine if this was a sheet of paper and you folded it, the blue lines and the yellow and the blue came towards you and the red and the white came towards you, you'd sort of have the outer shell wall of what was basically a stairwell for the sleeping loft. I designed this because I thought, she said, you know, we want something fun, we want something with a little bit of movement to it, we want something colorful and bold. And I said, okay, this is also going to be really hard. I'm going to do this in big solid chunks of color, right, because that's a lot easier to build. And I came up with some different designs. This was one of many, and I would email them to her, and she was like, yeah, that's okay. I was thinking something more white spacey. I was like, okay. And so we did a bunch of other things, and eventually I came up with something. I'm sorry, I don't have the slide for it. It was mostly white, but it had some kind of speckling, but not polka dots, more like little bits of dust that gather in an area, and if there's a bit of wind, they're blowing like this. And so they kind of had a little bit of that kind of thing going on with them. And it looked neat, and it was really easy to do in Photoshop, but not so easy to do in person. I'll show you the end result first. It looked like that when it was done. And those line drawings on the wall, as I mentioned, are her art. She came in with the pencil after it was done and drew all over the walls, but the red, blue, and yellow and white is all Lego. And so we built this thing, and we were literally going with creative gesturing. Like, she would come into the room, and she'd be like, this is great, wow, I love how it looks like all the pieces are just kind of sifting down, and then as it gets up, there's like more white spaciness with some dots. And she's like, don't be afraid to be like a little more, get like some clumps with the colors, like they shouldn't be too polka dotted. And I was like, okay, we can do some clumps. And she's like, but not blotchy, because we don't want it to look like, you know. And I was like, clumpy, not blotchy, got it. But that meant something to me. And then she came back later, and I would gesture under here, and I'd be like, you know, we're going to have an area here like this where it's going to be kind of white, but it's going to go to the color, but like on a diagonal with like a whoosh to it, and then it'll over here. You know, and we were doing that, and we're doing that in a way that you're talking about it as if it was a design that you could just paint onto the surface after it was done. But then we actually had to do it with Lego. And it was an absolute joy, even though we were standing on a construction site, breathing in construction dust, and they didn't have heat, and it was December, at 10 feet in the air on ladders. We had an absolute blast then going into the technical angle of how to really realize that kind of vision. Because when you're building Lego, as you saw, you go from the bottom up, right? You can't just apply the color and everything to the surface. There's Jung-Ah and Jeffrey you saw from the previous picture helping me out. We have to go line by line by line by line. We have to work around the steel that they put in, and it may not be perfectly straight. If it's 1/10 of a degree off or 1/10 of a millimeter too short, which it was, we had to go in there with razor blades and start shaving off sides of Lego pieces and getting them just to fit so they would fit in around the steel. The other trick was being able to get these patterns to look right. We actually came up with a neat trick. We built some little prototype squares right there in the room, and some were like 10% with color, and some had like 30% color, you know, getting more and more color or less and less color. And so we marked them. That's a 10, that's a 30, that's a 50. And then when we had the artist, our client, come in, we said, well, is this too much white space? And she was like, that's too much white space. Let's not go more than 70% white space. So we're like, okay, you know. And we would have a prototype for it right there. It would just be a little square with some dots on it. And then we went with yellow sticky notes along every one of these where the balusters are. Those are just railing balusters. And put the sticky notes up. This is an 80, 80, 70, 70, 70, 50, 50 60, 50, 50, 40, 30, 10. We said, okay, now when we're building, as we're going, we'll know we want to have mostly, okay, 10% white, 10% color on white. So we might have 2 flecks of color in there, just 2 little bumps. And then on the next one, we'll have more like 3 or 4. But don't do it too robotic, because it's going to look like patterns and stuff, and it needs to look a little random. And of course, you're going across building it this way, not this way. So you're going from the 10 to the 20 to the 30 to the 40, you know, like this. And then you go back over here, and you're back at the 10% again, and doing it again. And then we wanted swooshy, swishy, draggy things. She liked that idea. So those were easy, because we could just put big, long blocks of color in there. And get the stretches, but then we didn't want it to be too stretchy, because then it would just be all stretchy lines and no white space. And so it was an unbelievable challenge to do that. We did it, as I mentioned, up on the top of step ladders at a construction site, and my assistant Jung-Ah in the back there is reaching through to put pieces on. It's hard to put the piece down when you can't see it, because it's on the other side, because we're gluing and you need to make sure the glue doesn't come out. But anyway, I think this is a great example of what I was saying before about really having to become the person's paintbrush. Right? I had to do it the way she wanted it. It's her house. This is going to be there forever. Right? Her son, this is his bedroom. He's going to wake up every morning and see this when he's 20. But we didn't get into that conversation. Anyway, you know, I had to do it their way. I could have done my drawing, my first drawing, and built it that way. I found out after this was done, she had actually talked to 2 of my colleagues / competitors / whatever you want to call it, other people that do what I do for a living. We all know each other and work together. One guy who bills himself as an artiste said, all right, I'll come in, but it's going to be my way. I'll just do what I want, but we'll have a conversation first. She's like, I don't know about that. Another guy was an architect by trade who had given up he actually quit his own firm. He quit his practice and became a Lego professional builder guy. And he said, I live in Chicago and I don't like to fly, so I'll ship it to you. She's like, how the heck is that going to work? It's 10 feet tall. I have an elevator. This is in Manhattan. Anyway, and so I found out afterwards that when we met, it was serendipitous that her creative approach and mine were very similar. And we were able to work in this way and get something done. And I feel really lucky, actually, to be able to do a project like that, because it's not always the case. And a lot of times, you're building 150 Chewbaccas or whatever. So, people call me an artist. They say, this is art with Lego bricks. And art is a heavy word, right? It's a loaded word. Artist is also a loaded word. I mean, people ask me, like, I'll do an interview on TV, and they say, what do you want to be billed as? Are you Sean Kenny, Lego artist? And I'm just like, artist is, I don't know. You hear artists and you picture the Jason Pollock and all these, the Kuntzes and everybody that are doing their thing and pretentious and millionaires. And I'm neither a millionaire nor pretentious, I hope. But so for the longest time, I didn't like calling myself an artist. I thought it was too egotistical. But then I thought about the term graphic artist, right? Or even a creative director, or an architect, for that matter. A musician. Right? These people are all artists in their own right, but if you're doing a jingle for a soap commercial, you're still a musician, right? You don't have to necessarily call yourself an artist, but there really is an art to it. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I do know that, I really have to do what I love. I have to do what's important to me. I have to let, as I said earlier, my passion come out in my work. I really believe that if you're doing something that's special to you, even if it's that staircase and you're doing it in a way that's special to you, your passion will come out and imbue itself in your work. It will be right there for someone to see, right? And you can't read it the way you can read a word on a sheet of paper, and you may not even know it to look at it, like, oh, look at that detail that they put in there, like, not like that. But there'll be something about it. And people will look at it and they'll just say, wow. And they'll appreciate you for your work. And then that'll get you more work. And I really think that's the only reason. I don't even want to say that I've become successful. That's how I was going to finish this sentence, because I feel like I'm still just walking down the road. And I don't know where the destination is. It's just a horizon, right? And it's just a long path. It's the path we lead. Like I said, I worked in a cubicle for 10 years. That was great. It was interesting. It was a little frustrating sometimes. But, it wasn't my dream. I guess I thought it was. But after doing it for a while, I said, you know what? It's okay to pull up the parking brake on life and make a U-turn and go down another path, as long as it's something you really believe in. Because I think if you do, the world will appreciate that, and you will be successful. Thank you. Do we have any time left? What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say, I know I've run over, but maybe we can just spend 5 minutes if you guys wanted to ask some questions. I know some people have to run, yeah, sure. To build these sorts of things. So the question was, how much do these things cost, and how long do they take to make? So the sculptures in this exhibit, all 27 of them, took 5,000 hours to build. There were 410,000 pieces in all 27 sculptures. Which, if you think about that on an order of magnitude, a real car, has about 10,000 parts, and a Boeing 747 has a few million. So this exhibit sits somewhere in there. So there's a lot of work involved. I generally try to price my work as time and materials. I don't think there's value in putting an artsy overhead on something like that. I think that way I can justify how expensive these are. Because if you spend 300 hours making a bison, just whatever you all do for a living, calculate your own hourly rate right now in your head and multiply it by 100 hours. That's only 2.5 weeks of full-time work, right? So that's not even the bison. Right, so these things can get very, very expensive. Then you've got the cost of materials in there as well. So many of these things are very expensive, several $1,000s, tens of thousands of dollars, which is why it's always really special to be able to create these sorts of things. Oh, you want me to use this one? Sorry. Sorry, was there another half to your question? What were you saying? That got it? Okay, good. Yeah, what's your question? Hey, I like your shirt. Did you make that yourself?
Yeah, I did.
That's awesome. He's got a Lego shirt he made himself. The question was, which creation was my favorite to make? Do you mean here at the show or just in general?
Just in general.
Just in general.
Wow. Well, you saw I have a real passion for doing this urban stuff. That bike that I made, that you saw on the last slide there, that was actually absolutely awesome. And the reason was not just because it was a bike and it looked cool or whatever. I actually did that at an event. I was invited to be the guest of honor at an event, and we set up a bunch of tables in a big U all the way around me. And we put 75,000 pieces on these tables. And then in the center of the U had a table just for me. And let me back up for a second. Prior to getting to that event, I knew I needed to build something together with kids at this event. And I knew I needed to build something that could showcase that I was an awesome super Lego builder, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I could get to build with kids and get them inspired to create something and use their imagination, but then also do something that showcases what I can do and my ability. And that seemed really hard. So I was going to work one morning. I live in Manhattan. I ride my bike to work about 15 minutes, but I have to go over a bridge. And one day, traffic was stopped in both directions on the bridge. Usually it's one way. They're all going into the same city center area. It was stopped in both ways, and I was on my bike just zipping by in the bike lane, and I was like, hey, I'm the only thing moving up here. This is great. Wind in my face. And I realized at that moment I had an epiphany. I realized why I like riding my bike around the city so much. It's because I don't get stuck in traffic, among many other things, I suppose. And that was my idea for that bike. On those tables all set around me in a U, I got 75,000 black pieces, mostly rectangles, but also car parts, wheels and windows and doors and things. And then I had all those eco-green pieces. Let me get that slide back up. There it is. Whoop. Oh, my fancy high-tech. It's gone. Anyway, I had all these eco-green pieces set up in the center with me. And I said, okay, guys, I want you to build me the world's worst clogged-up, gnarliest traffic jam. Make whatever kind of crazy contraptions you want. Make a crazy car, a hover car, a UFO car. Make a walking Dinobot car. I don't care, anything. And just go to town, right? And so the kids had so much fun. They were able to be creative. They were able to use their imaginations. They were having a blast. And then I said, when you have something done, pass it across the table through to the center. I'll take it and I'll put it on the table. And I'll build this bicycle over it, a life-size eco-green bicycle to show traffic, or my bicycle triumphing over traffic. I don't have a slide of it, but underneath the bottom of the bike were thousands and thousands and thousands of these really awesome-looking, crazy contraptions that all the kids built. And I think the reason I loved it so much was not just because I like a bike, because biking is fun, and it's a cool model because it came out really cool, and I like it for that reason too. I like it because I like biking, and I have that whole part of me. But I also like it because it was a great way to combine everybody's creativity and the inspiration that I was hopefully bringing to the kids into this really fantastic piece. And the week after that I made this, I had made it just for the event, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I got a call from a gallery in New York City, and they're like, can we put this in our gallery next week? Because this is really cool. And it's like I was saying before, if you do something that's really special to you, other people are really going to love it. That's a long answer for a short question. How about you in the back? What's your question? What's the largest thing I ever made, and how many pieces are in it? I don't remember if it was in the presentation. There was a slide with a life-size polar bear. That was about the size of a Mini Cooper. Actually, we cheated a little. He was about 80% life size, so it was still that big. It took us, I think it was about 80 or 90,000 pieces. It took quite a long time to build, but we've got the second largest one right here. We have Mama Bison, who's only, she was done 2/3 life size, so she's only a little bit smaller, so you'll have to go check her out. What's your question? How old was I when I started with my Lego? When did you meet your mom? I have no idea. It has seriously, honestly been my entire life. People ask me that question all the time, and so I thought, well, let me ask my mother and my father, because I don't even remember when I got my first Lego set. And they didn't remember either, so we started going through old pictures. And we found a picture of Christmas when I was 2 years old, and I was stacking together Duplo blocks, you know, the big ones. And that's the oldest we can go back. So we're thinking 2 years old, I was probably doing this, although it's possible my mother swallowed some while she was still pregnant. I may have started then. I'll do one more question. I saw a hand back there. Yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you. I like that question. I've never gotten a question like that. She said that she thinks that the word artist is something that you have to own. You just have to own it for yourself. And sorry, repeat that. I want to get your exact words. Do other serious artists really consider this? Right. All right, and so do other people or myself consider myself a serious artist? And I'll use that word in quotation fingers, even though she didn't. And what is my definition of such? Well, I think it was a lot like I was saying before. I think art is a very heavy word, and it has so many different meanings. Someone I know replicates famous paintings with Lego, and sculptures for that matter. They'll make a little model of the Thinker, and they'll make a little model of Starry Night, and they'll set them up in little mini Lego galleries and have little people walking around looking at the little mini Lego paintings. And they live out in the UK, and they went on tour. They were displayed at the Tate because people said that's art, right? And I looked at that and I said, well, that's more like model making, you know. That's more like an architectural miniature, I guess. And not to belittle the work, because it is kind of a neat thing. It's a bit of a statement on art, among other things. So I think, much to what you were saying, you do have to own the artist moniker. And I think as long as you have your own idea of what it is, then you can own that, because it means so many different things. And you just really have to, I suppose, well, it was like I was saying, be confident in what you're doing and love what you're doing. The other half of your question, do other artists consider it art? I know that the folks that I work with, who are all artists, and that whole circle of people that I sort of tangentially interact with, the New York City art scene, have definitely started to understand that this can be art. I think I've met people even just as recent as yesterday who came out to the gardens and said, wow, you know, I heard there was going to be a Lego thing, and I didn't really know what it was going to be, but wow, right? Because you may picture the Harry Potter castle and the fire truck, and you don't really know where you can take that. And I think as there's been more and more exposure to this in the art scene, you know, like I said, I've done gallery shows, and some of my colleagues have done gallery shows. Doing shows like this, which puts these Lego sculptures in a really appropriate context, right? Up on a pedestal, in a beautiful setting, in a way that's presenting it the way you want to present it, presenting it as a piece of art, something you can look at and appreciate for what it is on many levels, then I think, yeah, that's art. And I think that because people like myself and very few others are starting to do this, I think that the greater art scene is starting to see that. Although I won't go into what the greater art scene is in my own personal opinion, because it's often very industrialized. All right, I'll take one more question. What's my next project? I don't know. I actually have, I think I mentioned, a series of lamps that I'm doing for HGTV. I actually have a series of children's books. My next children's book is coming out in July. I have a whole series. This is the fourth one. The previous ones are sitting in front of me. Wow, you guys brought the books. Look at that. Cool cars and trucks, cool robots. Much of what I was talking about with inspiration, these are my way of saying, all right, well, let me go out and buy a fire truck and a police station and a bunch of other sets, mix up the parts, and see what I can do with a really limited set of stuff, because that's probably what kids have at home. Give them some ideas and get them going. So the next book is coming out in the summer, and then the one after that, Cool Castles, guys, you got to put it on your wish list, comes out in September. There's a dragon attack. It's very cool. And I think I'm already over, so thank you very much for listening and for your questions and everything.